There are a lot of things that we can learn from Supernatural, but the greatest lesson I personally took away was that no matter how low someone's expectations of you are, you can always fail to meet them. I'm not going to try to unpack the entirety of my supernatural trauma because I just don't have time. None of us have time. I've been in the BL fandom for about 2 years now, and in that time, I couldn't help but notice it seems like an awful lot of us were, at some point, however reluctantly, fans of the CW show Supernatural. Now, the BL fandom is massive, and the Supernatural fandom is also massive, so statistically speaking, it's not really a surprise that there's overlap. But the more people I interact with who later turn out to also be survivors of this godforsaken show, the more it makes me think about how strangely logical it seems that we all ended up in BL. For me personally, I think there are 3 main factors that make BL a tailor-made rabbit hole for me to fall face first into. I like it here. Do not rescue me. I mean, this one's really obvious and the least unique thing. It's queerbaiting. Briefly summarized, queerbaiting is a cute, fun, fresh marketing technique wherein a show will hint at the possibility of queer relationships without ever actually intending to deliver on that promise, the goal being to get and then retain views from a queer audience. Isn't that nice? There are plenty of shows and other forms of media that are guilty of queerbaiting audiences to some degree or another. But Supernatural goes above and beyond by being what I think is a textbook example of what not to do if you're trying to avoid queerbaiting your audience. I could go into a thing here about how deciding whether or not something counts as queerbaiting can be a very nuanced discussion, sometimes with no clear answer. But at least in the case of Supernatural, I think Sarah Zed put it best when she said,
"There are lots of cases where people immediately ship 2 dudes who so much as breathe in the same direction, but Supernatural is aggressively not one of those examples."
If you've spent time on fandom Tumblr, you're probably at least familiar with posts like this. Long meta-analyses breaking down an individual scene, an entire episode, sometimes a whole character, to pick apart and point out the bits and pieces that imply queerness. And this can be really fun to get absorbed into. I mean, it's validating and encouraging to hear that other people are seeing the same things that you are. The problem was, at least for me, that after a while, it can kind of start to feel like we're all just fruitlessly collecting evidence to try to prove the existence of our ship or of a queer character in a way that fans of straight ships would never be expected to. Outside of fandom spaces, you can casually mention that you're a fan of Sam Jess or Dean Lisa or Cass Meg and just carry right along with the conversation. But Dean Cass, you better be ready with a dissertation complete with MLA formatted bibliography, and you should be aware that the audience you're presenting it to likely isn't actually interested in hearing you defend it. After about a decade of that, is it really any surprise that finding BL would be extremely satisfying? I can trust my own eyes in this genre. Like, I can enjoy these stories for what they are without being forced to play really obnoxious games like stop making everything gay, or maybe you just don't understand platonic friendships, or keep giving us money and maybe next time we'll follow through on the obvious queer relationship. Most of my ships actually sail here, and even when they don't, it doesn't feel like I was promised something, cheated out of it, and then mocked for expecting follow through in the first place. The overall narrative of Supernatural is very structurally sound in much the same way that scaffolding held together by wet Scotch tape would be structurally sound. There are a lot of reasons for that, but 2 of them are that the show suffers from the curse of season-to-season storytelling, and it went on for way longer than it ever should have. In the first case, the problem is that it's really hard to know where the story should go if you have no idea how long you have to tell that story. How high should the stakes be? How much should the characters change? Should the season finale be a conclusive ending or a cliffhanger with a twist reveal? Role for narrative cohesion, I guess. In the second case, it's a matter of the story just being too massive to ever be able to wrap it up in a satisfactory way that covers all or even just most bases. That makes it really tough as an audience member to figure out what to pay attention to, what things matter. By contrast, it's very common in BL for a series to be complete or complete-ish in a single season. Some things do go beyond that, but not even necessarily in the traditional sense of a season 2. The History series is a good example of this. Each new season is really just a new collection of stories with new plots and new characters that can be watched independently from any of the other seasons. As another example, you have things like I Promised You the Moon. I would consider that much more a sequel to I Told Sunset About You rather than a second season. I assume there are a lot of reasons that BLs tend to be structured that way, but my guess is that it's at least partly because a lot of BL series are adaptations of existing novels or webtoons that are already complete. So even if the drama deviates from the original plot, the point is that the screenwriters at least have points of reference to go back to. Now, I'm not going to stand here and pretend that BL stories are somehow exempt from things like plot holes, nonsensical storylines, weird pacing. Not at all. My point is just that after Supernatural, the one season on average nature of BL dramas makes them feel much more digestible and like a way better investment of my time. And even in the case when they are sort of an insane mess, I can sleep peacefully at night, confident in the knowledge that the insanity will last about 12 episodes, not 15 seasons. Fanservice is, to me, a pretty morally gray topic. I have a lot of opinions on it, and I think there are plenty of complex discussions to be had about it. But that's for a different video. For now, I'll just say that in the context of an ex-Supernatural fan migrating to the BL genre, the presence of fan service at all is noteworthy. In terms of interactions with the cast and crew of Supernatural, there are plenty of instances of fans having not great experiences when they try to bring up a queer ship. It often feels like there's this sort of underlying vibe of discouragement around asking questions that have to do with queer themes at all, which is really frustrating because for a lot of fans, that's a hugely important aspect of the show. So to go from that to BL, where actors not only acknowledge that their ship exists at all, but actively promote their ship by being flirty with each other in interviews, at fan meets, on social media, it's easy to see why that seemingly endless stream of extra content would be so appealing. I can have whatever feelings I want about fan service on the whole, but at the end of the day, damn it, it's effective. Anyway, those are just the most obvious things that I think explain why I seek refuge from my supernatural trauma in BL specifically. I'm sure it's a little different for everyone, so if you're part of the supernatural to BL pipeline or similar, let me know what other factors apply to you below. Maybe if enough of us trauma bond over this, we can all get through it together. Bye.